So before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the Hooks Institute. Our mission is teaching, studying, and promoting civil rights and social change. And I have to say, it's interesting for me to see how important the study of civil rights, both past and present, is so relevant to determining where we go next as a nation with making sure that we are an inclusive country and that we protect the rights of all people. And in this context, certainly the lives of Black Lives Matter. And we're going to get to how that came about and the difference between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. So the Hooks Institute has a series of programs. We do policy papers, which look at contemporary issues. For example, one of the issues we're examining now is the use of land installment contracts in Memphis. They're basically rent with the, over time with the desire to own, but it doesn't result in owning property as frequently as it should, and its disproportionate negative impact on African Americans. We also have documentaries, so it's important that we engage our audience through contemporary media, including films on the life of Dr. Benjamin Hooks. We have a short documentary on YouTube on Ida B. Wells and the lynching at the curb in 1892, which resulted in her anti-lynching crusade and her being driven out of Memphis because of it, because of the crusade. We also have public forums, this is one of them, but we have public forums like our National Book Award, which honors a book that best furthers the legacy of the American Civil Rights Movement. And finally, and I think this is where I will dovetail into our event today, we fund faculty research. And we do that through either issuing calls for proposals from faculty and are actually looking out into the Memphis community to see, and the Memphis University community, to see what topics faculty are exploring that are relevant to the Hooks Institute mission. I am so proud that the book Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter received a grant from the Hooks Institute for its research and commend its authors on its publication. So let's start with just a short introduction. Amanda, again, is with the Department of Communication, and she specializes, among other things, in issues of race, racism, and whiteness. Dr. Johnson also is in the Department of Communications, and his focus is on African American public address, rhetoric, race, and religion, media studies, and interracial communications. So let's get started. So Dr. Edgar, could you explain how you and Dr. Johnson, and I'm gonna, for just short, just call you Amanda and Andre. We can save time on the Facebook call. What led to you all investigating this topic of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter?
Well, Andre and I usually would say Dr. Johnson, but I will also shorten. Andre and I arrived at the Department of Communication and Film in 2015, fall of 2015. And that was around the time that the Black Lives Matter hashtag started to really pick up. Now, of course, that's not the first use of a hashtag to promote racial justice and to advocate for restrictions on policing. But that's the moment that Black Lives Matter picks up, and at the same time, All Lives Matter starts to really gain prominence. So Andre and I were kind of both watching this as people who are invested in the struggle ourselves and whose research intersects. So we decided that we wanted to see what people who were on the ground using those hashtags were saying, apart from how we might normally study the leaders of the movements.
Okay, so next question. And can you all hear me?
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to start, just jump into the book and then go to the methodology. So Andre, I was surprised by the book, and I actually have the page number. It's in the introduction, Roman numeral 18.
Excuse me, is this the dissertation defense? I thought I passed that. No.
So one of the things, describe All Lives Matter. And one of the surprises I had is that 59%, if I read this right, of African Americans that you all surveyed and interviewed were proponents of All Lives Matter versus using the term Black Lives Matter. So could you break that down?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the glaring thing that that we discovered in our research that there were a lot of African Americans who would, if had a choice. Now, this is not saying that the African Americans that were proponents of All Lives Matter did not think that Black lives mattered, but if they had a choice, and I think Amanda can speak a little bit to this, if they had a choice, they would say All Lives Matter over Black Lives Matter because of a couple of reasons. One, they wanted to be inclusive. They did not want to exclude, or they felt like they were really excluding. A lot of them, their faith dictated that, they should say all lives matter. And again, the other one was just for a better understanding. I remember a couple of people in our interviews and our focus groups saying that if we really want to make Black Lives Matter, I think that tag is problematic. If we can say all lives matter, then we can fall under, this is the interviewees talking, then we can fall, if we can fall under all lives matter, then we can see that Black Lives Matter, and we may have a better chance at persuading white people to join us in this movement. Amanda, you want to say anything about that? Because you really were between us, you really picked up on that right away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll echo Andre's sentiment that we were surprised by the demographic breakdown. And so just, I guess, to put it another way, so among the people who responded wanting to advocate for all lives matter, we did a self-report, meaning that we just asked for people who wanted to come to us and advocate and explain their reasons for advocating either the Black Lives Matter movement, or, and we try to be really clear in the book, or the All Lives Matter hashtag, which we don't see that as a movement the way Black Lives Matter is. But among those who came forward and said, we really want to advocate for all lives matter, the demographics of that group roughly matched the demographics of Memphis. And so our study is all local, based on people who were able to come to our campus to speak with us. But so 41% of the All Lives Matter respondents were white, and then 59% were African American. So we were surprised by that as well, but I would just echo what Andre said, that there were a wide range of reasons. And then I also want to note, because I think it's been interesting to watch over about 4 years since we interviewed people, the really dramatic shift in what these hashtags and movements mean. So All Lives Matter at that point was much more sort of up for debate. People were talking much more about what it meant. But even by the end of our recruitment period, when I would go on to look for folks who were using All Lives Matter, it was nearly completely using it in a mocking way. So we see that sometimes, right, where things will trend on Twitter, but it isn't necessarily people tweeting in support of that hashtag. It's often people kind of pointing out the hypocrisy or pointing out the problem. So
Okay.
That's helpful.
Okay, so it's important to note that your focus group was Shelby County residents for the most part, or people within the vicinity of the university. Do you know if that does that bear out nationally, that this hashtag of All Lives Matter resonating more than I thought in the African-American community as evidence? Well, if you compare it to what you all found from your local study, of 59% of the people you're interviewing associating their attitudes more with All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter.
Well, and we definitely want to clarify that 59% is just for the people who were doing All Lives Matter. So that the Black Lives Matter group was predominantly African American. It's just that within the All Lives Matter, it more matched the demographics of the Shelby County area.
But it included whites as well.
Say what?
So it included whites as well.
Right, right. Yes, both groups had various racial groups represented, not only Black and white, but other racial groups as well. So this is such an interesting question, I think, is whether this is kind of applies nationally. And one thing I would I would say I was looking over the weekend preparing for this interview. I wondered whether anyone had done a national level study of our work, this kind of question that we were asked. I did not find anyone that has done that. And in fact, when you do a search for what does all lives matter mean, scholarship that's approached it, it really assumes that all lives matter participants, all lives matter adherents are all white, which I think is an interesting point of erasure. And I think we lose some intricacies of the way those movements played out. So all I can say is that the All Lives Matter racial demographics really matched the Memphis demographics. We aren't really able to generalize based on the data we gathered. But we also do know that African-American voters are not monolithic when we think about political campaigns. So I would speculate that I don't think if you did a national study that 60% of all Lives Matter users would be Black, but I'm sure that there are some national.
Okay, so the next question, it's important to note that your book was published in 2018. And so talk about a rapidly moving train. It's almost like you're memorializing history as it literally unfolds under your feet. So here's my question. Trayvon Martin, and all the other deaths at the hand of the police. We know the names at this point because it's been part of many, many press releases. But I think we can say that the murder of George Floyd was the perfect storm or the turning point. And now you see corporations, organizations, individuals, all embracing or appearing to embrace the Black Lives Matter mantra. And so, Andre, is this a shift in the findings? And do you see a shift in the public's understanding of what Black Lives Matter? And so I guess I'm going to ask both of you, you can answer that question and I'll go to the next one.
No, I've been thinking about that actually. Just only took 7 years. I mean, hey, 7, woohoo!
7 years.
Yeah, just take 7 years. And really, when you think about it in that time frame, the phrase, and still people have not all people are comfortable even saying Black Lives Matter, period. End of discussion. No but, no and, just that phrase. So in one sense, yes, it is remarkable and it is surprising, and it is a cause, I think, and a call for celebration perhaps. But I just want to be very careful. I want to see how this trends out because we know about co-option. We know about how people can infiltrate a movement, in this case, Black Lives Matter, or even just a hashtag, and start doing things centered around that. I'll give you a concrete example of this. The concrete example, especially with elected officials who for a while would not say Black Lives Matter on the campaign trail, just would not do it. Here's a concrete example. Well, there are Black Lives Matter advocates having a 5-point, 10-point plan. This is what we would like elected officials to do. This is what we want. This is what we want in police reform. This is what we want in economic justice. This is what we want in education. So they have this platform, but for right now, elected officials seem comfortable in painting streets Black Lives Matter Boulevard, or doing general stuff like passing resolutions on Black Lives Matter. That's not in the plan. And Black Lives Matter advocates are saying, "Oh, okay, great, but can we get back to the plan?" So the point is this going to be more symbolism, more feel good, more, I protested for a couple of weeks and I got a street? Or is this going to be the lasting change that Black Lives Matter advocates have been talking about since 2013? And, if we connect this, of course, to the long civil rights movement, forever.
Right. Okay, so let's break down Black Lives Matter and then get back to the plan, because I think you made very important points. So first of all, what is Black Lives Matter? And I want you to talk about it beyond sort of the media focus solely on police brutality. So how is Black Lives Matter defined by the founders and its platform?
Mm-hmm. Amanda, you want to take that? I just
well, you want to talk about the founders and the platform? I can talk a little bit about the participants.
Well, the three founders, I think that I'd like for you to identify them, and in fact that it did not include just police brutality, but also focused on other diverse groups, and that it's broader than just police brutality, even though the media focus, and maybe rightly so because of these horrific deaths, have been focused on police brutality.
Okay, let me just do with the meanings of Black Lives Matter, which, by the way, is chapter 1 of the book, The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Just thought I'd just throw that out there. Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Cullors are credited with creating the hashtag and the phrase Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter has always meant full participation of Black lives and the full recognition of the humanity of Black lives, period. And so police brutality is just one area that Black Lives Matter and the movement covers, but also social justice areas in the arena of education, economics, gender, sex, what Black Lives Matter, and why it was so powerful, Daphne, is that Black Lives Matter meant that Black Lives Matter, period, end of discussion. And one of the, I think, the movement's strongest point, which we lift up in the book, is that even when the so-called victims are not what we typically call a perfect victim, that did not stop Black Lives Matter advocates from advocating for that victim and his or her family. Okay, so it does not matter. Right, so Black Lives Matter, period. And that in and of itself was radical, was just revolutionary, because advocates of this generation of social justice were protesting against the perfect victim narrative. Like, you know, we tried to give you the perfect victims and you still kill and oppress and suppress and defund. We might get to that in a minute. And you still do all of the stuff for the programs in which will help and strengthen Black lives. And so, no, Black Lives Matter means just that. Black lives.
So let's break this down a little bit. So the perfect victim, for our audience, if they're not familiar with that term, if you go back to the Montgomery bus boycott, yeah, Rosa Parks would have been considered the perfect victim. She was a member of that. I'm seeing if you agree with me. She was
no, you're perfect. Yeah.
Member of the NAACP. She was, quote unquote, by the terms of that period, church-going, respectable. But yet, previous to her sitting on the bus, there was Claudette Colvin who sat on the bus and was evicted. And the NAACP in Montgomery decided not to support a protest when that teenager was evicted, because I believe she was
Claudette
at the time.
Yeah.
And so they wanted, so this perfect victim comes up that Black people have to be, frankly, near sainthood before you can advocate for the fact that their lives demand respectability and not physical abuse or mental abuse.
No, I'm going to say, I mean, that's the perfect example, right? And we still see it today, even amongst Black people. When we talk about who is the victim, we immediately begin to shape a narrative around where this person didn't deserve it. This person did not deserve to die because this person was in school, or this person had a job, or this person was a family man or a woman. This person had children. This person worked. She was working on the front line. She was an EMT, and she was helping with the COVID-19. I mean, all of that. And Black Lives Matter broke through that. And the movement says that doesn't matter. That person was a human, and it is more indicative of what these other humans did to the person than the person who's the victim. And that, like broke open a lot of people's thinking, like, yeah, that's right. Why do we have to, have this perfect victimhood in order to be respected by others? And
Right.
what Black Lives Matter finally said is, and I think when you mentioned George Floyd, it just broke through that, wait a minute, I saw this with my own eyes, on TV, on social media, in a loop, and this man had his knee on this guy's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And one of the first times, people were like, I don't care what his past was. He did not deserve that. That is what Black Lives Matter has been fighting for since day one.
Right.
That you can see the horrific event instead of trying to rehash and reimagine and all of that. And
Right. The inhumanity.
people just did not do that this time.
Yes. So one of the things I think is important, and I'm going to move on. So with the Black Lives Matter, is that you all make an important point in your book, is that the founders say that Black Lives Matter mean all lives matter, which include queer, trans, undocumented people of color, Black and brown people of color.
Right.
And I think it's also important to note that the three women who founded, I think they identify with the queer community. Is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a complex movement, but because of the visual horrific nature of police brutality, that has been the focus, and maybe rightly so, at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you talk about the plan, and you say, you go back to Andre, and I want to get Amanda, you in here too, and I've had this discussion with lots of people as well, and about what is the plan, and sort of this, I don't even know quite how to describe it. It's almost like guilt that's going on in corporate America. It's like, oh, this problem is so bad, we want to help, we want to fix it, but also not necessarily guilt, but also not knowing how. And so I think the recent, for example, I think who makes Aunt Jemima syrup? Is it General Mills?
Quaker,
Yeah.
is it Quaker?
Okay. So in any event, they just removed the photo.
We know what you're talking about. Just go ahead on talk about it.
They're all owned by the same mega
Right.
conglomerate corporation, aren't they?
Right.
Go
So they just said they're gonna, come into the 21st century and remove this sort of segregationist, oppressive legacy of Aunt Jemima. I know there's lots of debates about her meaning, but I was asked by someone, they said, okay, they removed it, but what jobs did that create? What systemic change in the corporation did that create? Did that result in any promotions or cultivation of people of color? So, and then you look at the amount of money that's being like $10 million, $1 million going to various organizations. But I think this is where maybe reparations comes in. And I'm not talking about the simplified version of reparations, which nobody's talking about, that somebody gets a check, but rather it requires government and private sector intervention to address long-term oppression of people of color, which is not millions of dollars, but multi-billions of dollars to create this change, and looking at the issue of how the police are funded, police doing work they shouldn't do, that thing. So those sorts of things. So Amanda and Andre, if you could expand on that, sort of what is the infrastructure platform of Black Lives Matter, and how does it fit into these recent gifts that we're seeing being dispersed to organizations that address civil rights in the nation in general?
Sure. So I always point people to the Movement for Black Lives, m4bl.org. There's a whole list of policy platforms, which I checked earlier, and there's a COVID-19 platform as well, respect and support for protesters, representation in terms of political power. But then I think the big thing that folks are talking about, reparations, as you mentioned, Daphne, the big thing that people are talking about right now are this investment divestment, which is so core to not only the Black Lives Matter sort of at the leadership level, the policy platform, but also our participants were aware and adept at discussing these kinds of things. And so when we say invest, divest, invest in the things that help support Black folks getting the same sort of fair treatment and same opportunities that white folks are able to get. So this is things like equal funding in education, things like housing, of course, the police platform, issues of healthcare, which we're now seeing in sort of graphic and full view as Andre, actually, we were to go in fall and talk at a conference about this idea of what happens when COVID-19 becomes the Black disease. Then does the government stop investing in it? Do people stop caring about it? White people stop caring about it? So I think your point is well taken, Daphne, that Black Lives Matter is so uniquely an intersectional movement. And that means that all of these aspects of identity, from race to class to gender to sexuality, those all are addressed in the platforms that are moved forward. It isn't only police brutality, but of course, police brutality is what brought Black Lives Matter to the fore in this particular moment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So Andre,
go ahead.
One of the criticisms are critiques is, unlike the 1960s civil rights activists, where you had the NAACP at the forefront, or Dr. Martin Luther King, that who lobbies government officials, what representative, what entity engages at the local, state, and national level from Black Lives Matter on these systemic institutional changes like quality schools, investment in neighborhood and jobs and education? How it, working with Congress to make sure that adequate appropriations, I mean, we're talking billions, we're not talking millions, multi-billions,
right.
Are spent to address the legacies of slavery, Jim Crow, systemic abuse of African Americans, both physically, emotionally, financially, and the denial of a basic right, set forth in Declaration of Independence, the right for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So how, unlike, I can't say unlike, but people go back and refer to the 60s and that kind of organizational format. We knew who was heading up the NAACP. We knew the head. We knew people like Thurgood Marshall, Benjamin Hooks, Martin Luther King, and the list goes on, Fannie Lou Hamer. But in this Black Lives Matter movement, people struggle to identify who is leading. So what would be your response to that?
Right, and I will counter and say two things. Number one, it was intentional in that way, a whole decentralization of leadership, where on the local level, everyone who affirms Black Lives Matter or Black lives in general could do the work. But the second piece is the second piece of your question about who's actually lobbying, who's doing the work. Black Lives Matter always had a political platform from day one. And the political platform for a lot of elected officials was deemed early on to be so radical, so out of the mainstream, that nobody really wanted to touch it. But guess what? As time went on, and as movements such as the Poor People's Campaign, Fight for 15, all of those type of other movements that we see on a national level, undergirding all of that are folk who affirm Black Lives Matter, who were part of those movements. And all of a sudden now, there's a political platform in place for representatives and elected officials and candidates for these offices, that if you would like to run for these type of positions, here is our platform. And this is what we are trying to get done. Can you agree to this? If so, we can support you. If not, we cannot support you. And it has been going on. I remember right when we were working and finishing the book, people were coming up to us and to me especially, because they see that I am also one of the activists and community organizers here locally. Like, what is BLM doing now? What is Black Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter had always been, they've been meeting, weekly or bi-weekly. They've been working our platforms, working on agendas. Amanda just said the movement for Black Lives. I mean, it's on the websites. You can actually see the agenda. And that is the agenda that people are gravitating to now. Elected officials are gravitating to now to say, hey, it might be a time that we need to look at this. And give you a concrete example. The concrete example is now in DAs. All of a sudden now, I have been hashtag your DA matters, your DA matters. I couldn't get anybody to like, well, let's look at the DA. And all of a sudden now, you see what DAs in Atlanta, you see what DAs in Minneapolis, Chicago, and in these certain areas, New York. All of a sudden now, these DAs, but guess what? These DAs came to their positions because Black Lives Matter had talked with them, had meetings, and talked about an agenda. And that agenda is something different than we used to getting. So, you know, I know 2022 is right around the corner here in Memphis, Tennessee.
You mean 2020?
2020, well, I'm thinking 2022 for the DA. Your DA matters.
All right, so let's go to this. I mean, I think it's important to emphasize the importance of voting. And frankly, I just learned the other day that the state of Tennessee is 49th in the country in voter turnout.
Yes.
So that's a call to action for everybody to go register and vote, all right? So one of the things I wanna note to our audience, we are able to ask Amanda and Andre questions. So if you want to comment in the comment section, you can send it to us because we are looking at the comments and we're certainly willing to interject any comments you have into this conversation. All right. So in terms of where the support is going, Andre and Amanda, you've talked about, and Andre, I'd be interested, especially in Memphis on the ground, what support, if any, is going to the Black Lives Matter here? And even if you know nationally, because one of the things that, and I could be wrong about this, but one of my favorite expressions is a song out of Isley's Brothers, the music group Isley Brothers. It's called Harvest for the World. And,
Right.
and they say those who pay the price benefit the least. So are we seeing, I am seeing support going to nationally recognized civil rights organizations, which have been the mainstay for 40, 50 or longer years, even 100 years in this country. And the question is, are the people who created this moment in history, which is the Black Lives Matter movement, how are they, excuse me, how are they, if at all, being recognized by these corporate, educational, or other institutions, if you know?
Well, I can quickly add, and Amanda can hop in. That's some tension there. There is some tension there that the organizations that are on the ground, typically smaller, typically not well-funded, people who would just come together, cobble up whatever it is that they can cobble up together to do certain things, and asking for donations or being part of a larger nonprofit. You know, Memphis is also the #1 city of nonprofits, or right up there for nonprofits as well. You can take that good or bad, but you know, that's another Zoom talk. But yeah, there is some tension because people are saying, wait a minute, you know, we're on the ground, we're doing this type of work, and people are kind of suspicious of organizations that have, I won't say for the most part, because I'm not going to be that strong, but who have, you know, what's the word? Treaded on being a little bit more conservative. How about that? That's good. A little bit more conservative in their approach to this. Now receiving all of the accolades and benefits and people that, you know, you never seen before actually leading marches and trying to make statements and even getting audiences with the mayor, you know. And so people are asking those questions right now. It would be interesting to see what shakes out of this. And I am watching and I am looking.
Well, okay, Amanda?
Oh yeah, I wanted to hop in and kind of second that and add, I think this particular moment in history is such an interesting moment because we were in this COVID social isolation period before, where I think there was a conversation about supporting the local businesses that you care about and supporting restaurants and bookstores. And one thing that I have noticed that I haven't seen before in 2016, for example, 2018, other times when Black Lives Matter has been trending, I haven't seen so much focus on thinking about who are your local Black organizations and thinking about supporting not only sending your donations to national organizations and national corporations, but also sending your money locally and investing really locally in on the ground things that are going to improve your community, which I think is such an important platform for Black Lives Matter. It's not only national, that's partly why we set the book in Shelby County. It's also a real local investment, thinking about how, Andre, like you say, your DA matters. That's not a national, that is a local on the ground kind of movement issue. So I think that's an interesting sort of collision of COVID-19 and BLM that I'm really happy to see. I think folks should think about donating their money to local organizations as much as you can, as long as you can figure out who that is that's doing the work and make sure you're recognizing them.
Yes, and your Hooks Institute.
The Hooks Institute, for example. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
All right. So, Andre, you mentioned, as you started answering, and this is for you too, Amanda, and I asked where were the resources going. So, politics and change make strange bedfellows, right? So, Andre, you mentioned people who, and we're not on the forefront of the BLM movement, et cetera, but is there any effort underway to build coalitions with these traditional civil rights organizations with Black Lives Matter leaders?
Yeah.
And do you see that unfolding now? And how do you foresee that taking place?
Yes, I mean, but that was at the beginning as well too. You got to remember, at the beginning, people honestly thought that Black Lives Matter was too out there. There was too, well, yeah, I mean, it is, I know in 2020, since we are all now fawning over Black Lives Matter and everybody is saying it now, and it is just the cool thing to do now. In 2013, 2014, it was tough to have people commit and support a movement that talked about Black lives in the way that they were talking about, as you mentioned earlier, queer lives, trans lives, women at the forefront, women leading. I mean, that was just, nobody wanted to, I won't say nobody, but, others just didn't want to do that. So now it's a little bit more palatable, a little bit more understanding. But here's the point. The point is that Black Lives Matter is not at its root changing their stances and positions from the beginning. So if you are going to work with Black Lives Matter, you're going to work with trans lives. You're going to work with gay lives. You're going to work with poor Black lives. You're going to work with able-bodied and other bodied members in the Black community. And here's the key, leadership will have to be shared. That, and you know this from studying the civil rights movement and studying even Black church movements, that, hey, usually I'm in charge. No, you're not in charge. And that was a big pill that a lot of people who were used to being in charge had to swallow if they were going to work with Black Lives Matter. So the invitation is still there. I know Sister Shahida Jones, who is the president of the official Black Lives Matter chapter here, she will meet with anybody. But if you think she is going to compromise the core beliefs of BLM, you just got another thing coming. And so So how does that look on the ground? And it's one thing to compromise, but it's the other thing to compromise your beliefs and your foundation of who you are. And so that's not just not going to happen. So BLM is still, doing what BLM has always done. We just want to see how this is going to shape at the end, especially after this election, after 2020. So if the election goes the way that many people would like it to go, then is BLM still going to be important? Now, for me, yes, but would other people think so? It's going to be very interesting to see. And I'll be right there on the ground watching.
Well, I think one thing too that we saw in 2016 was that BLM did not back off from the 2016 election. And so a lot of politicians were really pushed. And I think the important takeaway is that's political cover, right? That allows the institution as a whole to shift in that direction. And some of the polling policing is the thing we're talking about right now, but I was looking at some of the polling surrounding this. It's in the 80s and 90% of Americans as a whole that want police reform. Now, reform is not what everyone wants, but to even have 80 and 90% of Americans supporting any kind of police changing at all,
right?
That's a really big thing. That is a moment in which, frankly, politicians can do the right thing without having to. That's a vast majority, right? If you want to be reelected, you need to address what the people are calling for. When we have 80, 90% of folks calling for this stuff, it's time, I think.
Okay, so let's address this question. And then I want you and Andre to think of what would be I'm going to do we are getting questions. So I would like for you to think of if you have to take one takeaway, not only from the book, but from your experiences on moving forward with the platform of Black Lives Matter, even if you're into the All Lives Matter camp. We hope people understand what Black Lives Matter means now after this rigorous discussion, not here, but also in the press and over the last few weeks. But what is your takeaway to our audience that you would want them to take away from this? I want you to think about that. But before that, I want you to explain, one of you, what defund the police means. Because I just explain how you interpret that.
You want to take that, Amanda?
I think that's all you.
All right. I just wanted to, defund the police basically means to, I think you used the term earlier, divest resources from the police department and to allocate those resources in spaces and places and institutions and programs, whatever you want to call them, that's going to help build the community. In Memphis right now, we spend, I think this last count, $282 billion on police services. And just imagine what 10% of that 282 billion can, what's that, 28 point some odd billion, that can go somewhere else. We always talk about the time between 3 and 6 in the afternoon is the time when a lot of children may get into trouble. That's what, quote unquote trouble, right? What would it look like to fully fund after school programs, fully fund them? What would it look like to fully fund the pre-K program that we've been talking about trying to fully fund, since I can remember? What would it look like to have community centers open throughout the evening, maybe even at night? What would it look like to have mental health professionals available? What about street conflict negotiators? If you're concerned about how people are beefing up in neighborhoods and in communities, what if we have and fully fund those type? You know what? I think that what Black Lives Matter advocates and police reform and policing advocates talk about is the notion of taking a lot of the burden off of police Stop calling the police when a loved one is acting sporadic, when you already know that that loved one has a mental issue or a mental condition. Why call the police when they're ready only with guns or tasers, when you can actually get the help that you need with the medical health professional? So this is, now, that's reason, that's reason, debate, and talking about how you fund stuff. If you really care about the community coming together as a whole and being holistic and being this shalom, let me just bring in a little religion, but bringing in this whole notion of shalom, this peace, this wholeness that the community and that all of the people should be working together to do. It's not eradicating the police, even though there are some abolitionists of policing as well too. It's not, but BLM is just saying, hey, I'm looking at this big budget here, and I'm looking at every time you talk about cutting and trying to meet budget, you're always cutting the poor people stuff. You're always cutting the folk that really need the services. You're always talking about cutting that. You're never cutting here, but you're always cutting there. And they're just saying, hey, it's time to cut where the big money is.
Right. Ironically, some of these points have been made in the context of even quality policing by think tanks, and even those who are policing. If you look back decades into policing, that police are not really equipped to handle the homeless problem. They're not. Right. That's not what they do.
And listen, and some directors and chiefs of police department would tell you point blank, hey, that's not what we do. We're not trained to do that.
Right. Or even mental illness. That, Memphis, for example, has got national attention for its quality mental health approaches, police responses, but they're not mental health providers. So the point is to look at what the police are doing and shouldn't be doing, because it's not their role, and investing in repairing and building infrastructure to support people in those areas. And I was asked in an interview on one of the local television stations, as I was waiting on the hold line, they said, they had a questionnaire and they go, we want you to send in your vote. Are you for defunding the police? And the way they were saying it was almost like a scare tactic, that there wasn't going to be people there are always going to be people on the street that we need to deal with people who aren't doing the right thing. And they come from all colors, genders. It's not race or gender specific. But this doesn't, defund the police doesn't mean that. It means reinvestment in areas needed to support the prosperity of all people in the community and people of color. Okay.
Manny, were you going to say something? I thought you were going to.
Well said. Absolutely. I just would add, we have a model of this. Camden, New Jersey did many of these actions that are being called for now, and it was successful. And I would just add, we know that when we introduce a gun into a situation in which there isn't a gun, that is a literal introduction of violence. So in domestic violence situations, for example, the chances of a woman being murdered in a domestic violence situation increase 500% when there is a gun. So defund the police is not saying we don't need any police, but rather stop introducing situations in which police are not trained, and so they are just therefore bringing violence into a situation where there doesn't need to be. But I don't know that I can add much to that.
No, I wanted you to get in because I wanted to just tag on to this. Is one of the reasons why defund the police is so scary is what we think about policing to begin with. And quite frankly, and I tell people this all the time, you call the police after typically a crime has happened. So police are not actually on stopping, oh, I'm gonna stop this person from breaking into your house. And no, they come in afterwards. So the point is, if we can begin to re-examine how we even think about police, the whole defunding police, the good news is, at least we're talking about it, at least that phrase brought up enough people to begin to have these discussions about it, because BLM had been saying that for a while, been saying, look, you got this budget, and you sign these union contracts. So when cities try to, blame the unions, no, you sit down and you sign these you give them this immunity, you give them this protection, you say that it's okay for them to do this, that, and the other. So what BLM is trying to highlight now is, listen, next time those negotiations happen, it won't be empty rooms anymore. The rooms will be filled. Well, people will be out. If we're still in COVID-19, the Zoom will be filled to capacity, because people are not gonna allow without their voice anymore, because they understand now what is at stake. And what is at stake is the same thing over and over and over again. I've heard, Daphne, that people are just trying to wait this movement out. That's just this part of the movement out. If they can just wait it out, you know, things will get back to normal real soon. I don't think it's going to get back to normal, not at least in that way.
Yes. All right. So we're going to come back to Amanda and Andre. So Darrell Kiner, Darrell, I think we need to turn you on in your video. So Darrell has been speaking with me over the last 2 weeks about participating in this, one as a Black male, and secondly as a student here at the University of Memphis. And so I wanted to give Darrell a few minutes to share his insights on how this moment in history and the Black Lives Matter movement has impacted him as a person and also a student at the U of M. And then after he finishes, we're going to go to the questions.
Hello. So the Black Lives Matter experience has had a huge, huge impact on my life. And it has shaped me to the person I am today and the thoughts that I have today. And I've been a victim of receiving poor education and not feeling equal. I've been a victim of the systemic racism for way too long. I'm hurting and I'm tired. I'm tired of feeling like I have to hide or change the way I am just to fit into what society says is appropriate. And from my perspective, there's so much more work to be done. And this is just the beginning. This is the first time that I feel that there's a chance that we could have real change. When COVID-19 first happened, I was overwhelmed with emails from businesses and people that were stating how much they cared about their communities, their people, their purpose. They stated that they were closing stores and doing what was right to stop the spread. But I was so furious when George Floyd and Breonna Taylor killing took place. Companies were quiet. They never sent emails to address issues. They didn't stand up right then for what was right and fight for justice. I reached out to the company that I worked for several times to ask, where do they stand, or do they feel that Black Lives Matter? We have to hold people accountable more than ever now. And that's what I was doing. I want to hear the words, Black Lives Matter. I want to see the actions. I feel we also have to address the miscommunication and the false narratives that are trying to destroy the movement, like was stated on the call earlier. The words defund the police has so much meaning to me as a Black male. To me, defund the police means give the police department a basic budget and nothing more. Invest more in money to African American communities. You know, build schools, build playgrounds that are safe and well kept. Provide resources to people of color who don't have access to other things. How can we build the communities should be the question. Investing in social workers. Social workers should be a part of this plan. Addressing mental health. Those are the things that we need to focus on. Not adding money to the police so they can just continue to arrest people of color for petty things and populate our jailing system. From my perspective, the police are supposed to be the ones who protect and serve, but they've done the exact opposite. The police have invoked fear among a group of people and are harming people of color. I understand that all police officers are not terrible people, but like the Minneapolis police chief said, silence is complicity. If the good police officers cannot stand up against their system that is harming communities of color, they are just as bad as the bad cops. And it hurts that no one wants to stand up for my Black life. Rashard Brooks, who was killed in Atlanta by a police officer, was on video begging to walk home or to have someone come and get him. However, the officer took advantage of Brooks. And instead of trying to help Brooks get home safe, Brooks was not being disrespectful, disruptive, or aggressive during the questioning. The man was sleeping in his car at Wendy's and he lost his life. His daughter's birthday was the next day. She was waiting in her dress for him to come home and he never came home. Yes, we are in 2020, and I had a conversation with my coworker who was white say, I thought America was further and better than this. We had our first Black president, and I thought racism was over. We had to sit down and have those conversations from that point. I had to give him the examples of how people of color are being oppressed. Many people said that they wanted to kill our first Black president. How there were pictures of his family hanging from trees circulating on social media. How people talked about the First Lady Michelle Obama and said vile below the belt things about her and her family. I realized that we need to have more dialogue with people who are not of color to express our emotions, to enlighten them on our culture and the things that happen in our culture. My stepmom, who was white, we have these conversations all the time. It is vital for me and her to have these real and raw conversations, as hurtful as it might be. But to all the people of color, we must come together, hold each other accountable, and never stop fighting. We have to remember that we matter. Let's build each other up and motivate one another. We have so much more work to do. And I don't want to just keep saying the words Black Lives Matter after someone is being killed. I want to feel that all Black lives matter. All Black lives matter.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to start with you first, Darrell. One of the questions I got was, what can people in the community do to support students like you who are trying to make systemic institutional changes in the very issues you identified? What would be helpful to you?
One thing would be understanding our culture. To know how to interact, to know what things there are, to know what's offensive, to understand what we've been through, and also to give us the tools or show us the tools to allow us to do things, to educate us, to give us true education, to give us equal opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess that would include supporting and donating to the University of Memphis, and specifically organizations that support people of color causes. Because one of the things you identified was the need to talk about this and have very difficult, I like the word raw you used, raw conversations with people who are unlike us.
Right.
So that's very important as well. Is that correct?
Yes, because if a person is white and they've never experienced my color, no matter how much they've been around me, no matter how much they've seen this, they'll never understand. So me being a person of color, I need to be able to express how I feel, express what's going on for them to be able to understand.
All right. So let me ask, I'm gonna start with you, Andre, then Amanda, and Darrell, if you have any insights, fine. But one of the questions we have is, what are some of the actionable items or things that the community can focus on in the next few months?
Some of the community can focus. Oh yeah, I think 3 things. We can focus on, of course, policing. We can focus on trying to, and I know many people are having meetings right now and trying to address our policing and how we police here in this city, both in the city as well as in the county. So we include Sheriff Bonner and sheriff deputies in that. Second thing, of course, is always education. Let's really begin to have a real meaningful dialogue with and about education. How are we funding education? Are we funding education? Where can we get the money? Oh, I know. What about that big police budget? Okay. And the third thing, I mean, you know, this is just off the top of my head, but the third thing is this investment in resources. And here's the thing, Daphne, studies have shown we know what actually works. Amanda mentioned the Camden, New Jersey, police department, but there are so many just examples of what actually works. We know what works. Do we have the will? And that's where I think the meetings and the pressure and the cover, all of that comes into and play, and to get elected officials that would not be afraid to do what it is that they know they need to do.
Okay, so concretely what you're saying is, I'm gonna take it from the macro to the macro, right, is as tedious as you might think it is, you got to go to your town hall meetings with elected officials.
Yep.
You just got to go. And in fact, I've learned so much from one meeting I attended with in one of our elected officials' office. Not necessarily from the elected official per se, but from the people in the audience and their concerns and how they felt about the community. If it's a policing issue, then it's certainly your elected officials who are your mayors, as well as the county commission and the city commission. You've just got to go. You've got to talk to them. As I said in an op-ed I wrote, every U.S. citizen, I didn't say this, but this is true, every U.S. citizen over the age of 18 who is eligible to vote has an employee, and that employee is called an elected official. And so you have to hold them accountable. You also have to be aware of what the issues are. And as much as I'm immersed in this world, because I'm at the Hooks Institute, over the last week, I have joined so many mailing lists just to see what people are doing, how it aligns with my views, you know, because I certainly have to learn and in the process of learning, and who are the people I can support. The third thing is these organizations need money all across the country. Voting is an issue. I mean, you read about this in the national news. Look what happened in Georgia, people standing in line 6 hours. They expect, you know, similar sorts of results in other parts of the country. They have like one polling place, I forgot the state, in each county. So in the midst of COVID-19, people are expected to stay and stand in line 10 and 12 hours. Now, this is stuff my parents fought against in 1959 in Fayette County, but clearly is going on today. So the bottom line is there are organizations out there that deal with voting only and the right to vote and are litigating this issue. So think about sending your dollars there, because many of us, we're not going to go to court. We're not attorneys, nor do we have the national profile or the resources, but there are organizations that do have the resources, do have the profile. So some of it's just taking some time to educate yourself about how you can get involved. Now, I have this example, and I'm not here one of the panelists, but if I ask someone, if I said to someone, I'm going to give you an all expense, I was telling a relative this, if I'm going to give you an all expense paid trip to Italy, I will pay for all expenses. I'm only giving you 48 hours to research travel, hotels, food. They would wear the numbers off the keyboard.
So wait a minute, we gonna get a trip to Italy?
No, my point is, when we ask people, no, Andre, you get more work. But if you ask people about how to get engaged, they seem to be at a loss. But the information is right at people's fingertips. And you can talk to people like Andre, me, Amanda. There's so many organizations locally, traditionally, who could really use the help of people who want to get engaged. So I ended up answering more than I should have.
That's all right.
That was great.
That was good.
Okay, here's the next question. Does the university have a role in pointing its community towards particular local leaders or organizations to create equity and deal with these issues of race? Does the university have any responsibility for that? Amanda?
Oh, right. Okay. So I'm going to take this question, and I'm not sure whether this is going to directly engage with what they're asking, but it is something I've been thinking about a lot. I don't know that I would imagine we have a lot of university affiliated folks on the call. I don't know. I hope some folks are listening. Hello. One thing that I would say is we, as part of the university, and I would also just white people as part of the university, one obligation that we really have, I think, is to interrogate the role of the university in the upholding of systematic racial injustice that helps prop up things like policing, housing discrimination. I want to shout out to some fellow communication scholars, Sharday M. Davis and Joy Melody Woods, who put up a Twitter hashtag, Black in the Ivory, which is really, I think, I keep seeing white people on my Twitter feed saying, oh my goodness, it was so eye-opening. I think every single white professor needs to read through that hashtag. This is a moment where we can really start to advocate for supporting institutes like the Hooks Institute, not only as individuals, but as the larger university. We must fund folks that are doing this work. We have to make sure that we are hiring in ways that support the calls from people like Darrell, who are saying, I want to have these conversations. Well, we need people with training to do that. So often that falls so disproportionately on our Black colleagues. We need to make sure that we're hiring so that that can be spread around. And then white folks have got to start stepping up to this too, I think, and know that you're going to mess up. We have to be open, I think, to learning from our Black leaders. So one thing that I would say is get on Twitter and start following some of these folks who are tweeting about this stuff and leading the charge. They'll tell you what to do. And I think sometimes we don't want to do it. So I still don't know what to do. Are you sure it's just that you don't want to do it? So I think following through on that stuff, donating, attending events, calling, do phone calls, not emails to your officials. Call and actually get to know and talk to the people that answer the phones. Put pressure on them so that our officials know that we expect them to stand up for what's right. And if they don't, we're going to make noise about it and make sure that they aren't reelected.
All right, that's Andre. Thank you, Amanda. I want you to focus briefly on religion. You are a minister, and I
play one on Sundays.
How has the issue of religion impacted decisions to support Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter? I'm going to give you 4 minutes.
Oh, I don't need that long. Because well, chapter 3 in the book talks about religion and Black Lives Matter as well. But there is this belief out here that, and it's typically in white evangelical circles, that since Black Lives Matter associates itself with a Marxist view, and it is and with its radical views, that it is not Christian, it's not part of the faith tradition, and you should have nothing to do with it. Now, a whole lot of Black folk adopt that type of position as well. We talk about that in the book as well too. But the overwhelming majority of people who affirm Black Lives Matter that are people of faith see no breakage in their support of Black Lives Matter and their faith. Matter of fact, Black Lives Matter helps them in their faith, because when you look at what Black Lives Matter, we talked about earlier, what Black Lives Matter stands for, the all Black lives mattering, all Black lives. That is the image of God. That is the Imago Dei. That is this whole notion of humankind created in an image of a creator. That is foregrounded and foundational to many people's faith traditions. And if you are resting in that, you will be hard pressed to not affirm Black Lives Matter, because of the community, because of the love and the compassion and all of that, because of other people standing up for Black lives. So that in and of a nutshell is what the religion piece is all about. But again, there are others who have other beliefs and traditions and stuff. And this is definitely another Zoom call. And we ought to have that too, talking about social movements and religion. Hint, hint, hint.
Okay. So I'm going to make some concluding remarks. And while I do that, I'm going to be brief, but I'm going to give each of you 1 minute to make a concluding remark about if there's one thing you would take away, you want our audience to take away. And you can think about that as I do my concluding remarks. So first of all, this is the book, The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. I believe it's on Amazon. Is the paperback on Amazon?
The paperback will be out. I just talked with the publisher the other day. July the 15th. It's supposed to have been out June the 15th, but due to COVID and due to the limited staff that they had, they apologized, and they're going to try to get it out next month.
Yeah. All right. So just check Amazon and see if the paperback is out. I know this looks backward on the camera. I am pleased to say that the Hooks Institute financially funded the research for this book.
Way to go, Hooks.
We never know at the time what are going to be the outcomes of these projects, but I can't think of a more timely and appropriate book for this time. And also, I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in today and encourage you to stay in touch with the Hooks Institute. First of all, you can do so by liking us on Facebook. If you haven't done so already, please follow us. Our events are listed on Facebook, and we will have other Zoom calls, especially during this pandemic. And we certainly see it as a way to bring our programming to a broader audience so that they don't necessarily have to come to campus or can't come to campus. Learn more about us in terms of our programming by going to our website page, which is benhooks/memphis.edu. You can Google it and find it. So anyway, I don't want to say I forgot my webpage. Secondly, please stay engaged by voting. Note that because of litigation, people can vote absentee. I think the deadline is June 30th to request the absentee ballot if you believe or feel that COVID-19 may present a threat to you. Now, I checked yesterday on the Shelby County website for voting, and they didn't have that in the language, but they had the form, the absentee form. The Secretary of State website clearly states that, but no, that is available to you. So also consider supporting organizations in Memphis. We're not going to tell you which ones. I will do a shout out for Hooks. You can go to our webpage and make a donation. And you can follow us to see if there are particular programs like the Hooks African American Male Initiative that focuses on the retention and graduation rates of African American males. So that's a program that you may be interested in. And finally, I'll conclude to say, we don't choose the moment chooses us. And so all the work that Hooks has been doing on civil rights through the years, I think, I've gotten questions from people, aren't we in a post-racial society? Well, clearly we're not. But I'm glad to say that we are thrilled that the University of Memphis, as well as the community and our donors, have supported this work, which shows that the issue of racial, economic, health, and educational disparities exist and are at the forefront of needed reform in this nation more than ever. And we at the Hooks Institute are proud to be part of the community that's calling for that reform. So thank you very much for supporting us. So on that note, let me turn to first, Darrell, do you have a 1-minute concluding remark?
Yes, I just want people to realize that it is important to listen, have open ears, and just to try to understand each other, try to understand each other's experience. Also remember to never stop fighting, to never give up, to fight for justice and to keep fighting. And just remember that all Black lives matter.
Thank you. Andre.
Well, first of all, I didn't get a chance to say this at the beginning because I knew we were pushing, but thank you for Daphne, for inviting us to do this. Thank you for supporting us early on when it was just ideas on a piece of paper before we even did the first interview, before we wrote the first word. You were there. The Hooks Institute was there. And you know personally that I would do anything that I can to help the Hooks Institute. It's a wonderful institute. Everybody, yes, you need to check out the Hooks Institute. They're doing some wonderful things and are willing to work with you to do even more wonderful things. So I want to thank you for that. And if just one thing to take away, I have an awesome co-author by the name of Dr. Amanda Nell Edgar, who brought me into this project. And I want to thank you again for including me into this project and working with me on this project and our continued friendship and our continued work together. I'm looking forward to doing bigger and better things. That's it.
Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, I will echo all of everything that has been said already. Thank you, Andre. This project was so collaborative in a way that I don't know that I've ever done a more collaborative project. Really, I think I'm very proud of it, and thank you for working with me on it and for so much support elsewhere. Thank you, Hooks. When I was kind of mentioning earlier, we have to support these institutes on campus. I will say I have learned a lot about African American history from Hooks. If we'll ever be back on campus, who knows? But the various displays, things at the library that you can go visit, and they're always so well done, so engaging. So I would say support Hooks. And then the last thing I would say, one thing we really wanted to make clear in this book was that Black Lives Matter is all about connection. So it's not only connection in terms of connecting to one another, but also that those connections are online and they're offline. So posting things on Twitter, on Facebook, that is not enough. You have to engage with your actual on the ground community. We have to, I would love what Darrell said. We've got to talk to people who look like us and people who don't look like us. We've got to figure this stuff out. We've got to be okay with messing up, being uncomfortable, and pushing forward that moment. And then it's also about connection to history. So we talk a lot about it in the book. The idea that BLM is not your grandmother's movement is really not true. So we talk a lot about how BLM is actually a continuation of, folks love to quote King, but we have so much to learn about the strategies of the 1960s and before and after that we can carry through with BLM. So we got to think in terms of connections and networks, even though the culture tells us sometimes that we're so isolated. We're really not. Every action you take, we're all in connection and community. So I hope folks will focus on that. And Black Lives Matter.
All right, well, thanks to our audience and thanks to all who are on the front lines of civil rights and social justice. We hope to see you soon.